I watched What Plants Talk About and If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front. What Plants Talk About is seeking to prove that plants behave in ways that are similar to animals. In order to prove this, scientist C.J. Cahill traveled around the country to observe how certain plants act. While traveling, he also spoke to plant specialists who were studying the particular species he was interested in. The film highlights how plants can forage, compete, interact, recognize their kin, and have social lives like animals. I thought it was a good addition to the film to first describe what they think plants are capable of, then describe how animals act that way, and then prove through their experiments that plants act in a similar way. Seeing the comparison between plants and animals one after the other really helped prove to me how animals and plants do behave in similar ways. The other film, If a Tree Falls, a story of the Earth Liberation Front, was completely different from what plants talk about. If a Tree Falls focused on the trial of Daniel McGowan as an eco or domestic terrorist. As the story of Daniel's trial progressed, the documentary also goes through the formation and the actions of the Earth Liberation Front, or ELF. These two films are on opposite ends of the spectrum and don't specifically overlap. I'd say it can be inferred that Cahill believes the environment, especially plants, should be protected and might be able to understand why the ELF would set fire and destroy certain buildings or companies, but I don't necessarily know if he would agree with those particular actions while protecting the environment. In terms of their differences, what plants talk about is slow, kind of dry, and educationally informative. There was a lot of biology themes present. If a Tree Falls was more of a morally conflicting film. Part of me agreed with the actions that the ELF took, but the other part of me realized that they destroyed property and promoted violence. Although I'm a little morally conflicted, I think Jensen would commend the ELF for being activists. In his chapter at Magical Thinking, he explains that writing letters, signing petitions, and hoping that society will change are not enough. He believes the real way to spark change is through activism, and ELF definitely believes in that principle as well. What Plants Talk About did a great job of explaining everything, and even with my limited biology knowledge, I was not lost or confused. That being said, the film was a little hard to pay attention to because nothing that interesting or attention grabbing happened. The time lapse photos they would continuously show throughout the film were pretty, though. In Chapter 8, Carolyn talks about biofortification, which is the breeding and genetic engineering of plants to change their nutrition content. Based on what plants talk about, I now wonder how these modified plants behave in comparison to their naturally occurring counterparts. Can they still choose the best food source? Can they still recognize their kin and stop competing with them for nutrients? This ties into another concept Carolyn talked about in Chapter 11, which is welfare economics. How can we as humans place a price tag onto these phenomena occurring within other species? I'm glad that What Plants Talk About highlights the aspects of plant life that most people are probably not familiar with, and hopefully this will then place a higher price tag on these plant species and leave them untouched. Both of these films were pretty eye-opening, however, I preferred If a Tree Falls.